Imagine walking around with a secret so dark that you are willing to kill if someone finds out. This is the story of two sisters who became lesbian lovers that ended in tragedy. In the quiet town of Willow Creek, Georgia, sisters Emily Harper and Rachel Harper were inseparable. Born only a year apart, they grew up playing hide-and-seek in their sprawling backyard, whispering secrets under the old oak tree, and dreaming about their futures. Their bond was unshakable, with Emily, the elder sister, often taking the role of protector, while Rachel adored her sister fiercely. To the outside world, they were just two normal siblings, but as they entered their teenage years, their relationship began to change. A stolen kiss during a game of truth or dare one summer night sparked confusion and curiosity. What started as an innocent moment between two close sisters evolved into something neither could fully understand. They convinced themselves it was harmless, just a phase, but deep down, both knew their feelings were anything but ordinary. As their connection grew, so did their fear of discovery, and they vowed to keep their relationship a secret at all costs. They knew that their love defied every boundary, but to them, it felt real, raw, and unbreakable. A couple of years go by. Emily and Rachel are now young adults and attend a community college. They continue to live with their parents. Their relationship had grown even more complex. They spent their days like any other college student, attending class and hanging out with friends, but their nights were filled with whispered confessions and forbidden intimacy. Their secret love was their sanctuary, yet it also became a source of constant anxiety. They couldn't let anyone see the way their hands lingered when they passed notes or how their eyes met across the dinner table. Their parents, David and Laura Harper, were loving but oblivious, chalking up their closeness to the fact that they were practically twins. The sisters mastered the art of deception, pretending to date boys from school to deflect suspicion. However, Emily's boyfriend, Jason, began to notice how she often seemed distracted, her eyes always searching for Rachel in a crowd. As the walls of their secret world grew tighter, the sisters found themselves caught between their love for each other and the fear of being exposed. They often talked about running away, fantasizing about a place where no one would judge them. But in the small town of Willow Creek, rumors spread fast, and secrets had a way of unraveling. The girls' grandmother, Margaret Harper, lived in an old farmhouse at the edge of town. A stern but kind woman in her 70s, Margaret often babysat the girls when they were younger and had a sharp eye for detail. She was a beloved figure in the community, known for her homemade pies and her role as a church elder. As the sisters grew older, they spent less time at her house, but Margaret still insisted on hosting family dinners every Sunday. One evening, Emily and Rachel arrived early to help with preparations. Margaret noticed their hushed conversations and the way they seemed unusually close, but she said nothing. Later that night, as the family gathered around the table, Margaret caught Emily brushing Rachel's hair behind her ear, a gesture too tender for sisters. Her eyes narrowed, but she kept her suspicions to herself. After dinner, Margaret offered to drive the girls home, using the ride as an opportunity to pry. "You two are always together," she remarked. "Don't you ever get tired of each other?" The question hung in the air, but neither sister dared to answer. A week later, Margaret unexpectedly stopped by the Harper household while the girls were home alone. Emily and Rachel had been careless, leaving the door unlocked and music playing loudly upstairs. Margaret let herself in, calling out their names, but there was no response. Climbing the creaky staircase, she followed the sound of laughter to Rachel's room. What she saw when she opened the door made her gasp in horror. Emily and Rachel were tangled together on the bed, performing a sexual act. The sisters froze as Margaret's face turned red with fury. "What on God's green earth are you two doing?" she bellowed. Emily scrambled to her feet, stammering excuses, but Margaret's shock quickly turned to anger. "This is sick," she spat. "I'm telling your parents." The sisters begged her to stay quiet, but Margaret stormed out, leaving them trembling with fear. Panic set in as Emily and Rachel realized the gravity of their situation. They knew Margaret would not stay silent. Her strong moral convictions would compel her to expose their secret. The sisters tried to brainstorm ways to stop her, but every idea seemed futile. That night, Rachel tearfully suggested the unthinkable. What if we made sure she couldn't tell anyone? Emily was horrified at first, but as the hours ticked by, desperation overtook her. They couldn't let their love be destroyed, couldn't face the shame of their parents or the ridicule of their peers. By dawn, they had made a pact. Margaret had to be silenced. Armed with kitchen knives, they drove to Margaret's house under the guise of an apology. Margaret opened the door reluctantly, her expression stern. As she turned to lead them inside, Emily struck first, plunging the knife into her grandmother's back. Rachel followed, her hands shaking as she delivered the fatal blow. The sisters stood in stunned silence, their breaths ragged as Margaret collapsed to the floor. Emily and Rachel stared at Margaret's lifeless body, their hands trembling and blood-streaked. The reality of what they had done began to sink in, but panic drove them to act. "We have to move her," Emily said, her voice cracking. Together, they dragged Margaret's body through the back door and into the woods behind her house. The darkness cloaked their frantic movements, but every snapped twig and rustling leaf felt deafening. They dug a shallow grave beneath an old maple tree, their fingers blistering as they worked through the dirt. When the body was finally concealed, Rachel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "What if someone finds her?" she cried. Emily grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her lightly. "No one will. We'll act normal. We have to." With the grave covered and the knives wiped clean, they returned to the house, scrubbing away every trace of their crime. As they drove home in silence, the weight of their actions loomed over them, but they clung to the belief that their secret was safe. When Margaret didn't show up for church the following Sunday, the town was immediately concerned. It wasn't like her to miss a service, especially without telling anyone. Her neighbor, Mrs. Carter, was the first to notice something was wrong and reported her absence to the police. Officers arrived at Margaret's house to find it eerily quiet, the door locked, and no signs of forced entry. Her car was still in the driveway, and her purse sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The disappearance baffled everyone, especially Margaret's family. Emily and Rachel feigned shock and worry, clinging to their parents as the search began. They answered questions from the police with carefully rehearsed lies, even joining search parties that combed through the woods they knew held Margaret's grave. Each time they passed the maple tree, their hearts raced, but they kept their composure, determined not to slip. As days turned into weeks, the sisters struggled to maintain their facade. Emily threw herself into schoolwork, hoping to distract herself from the guilt that gnawed at her. Rachel, on the other hand, became increasingly withdrawn, plagued by nightmares and the constant fear of being caught. Their parents noticed the change, attributing it to grief over their grandmother's disappearance. "You girls were so close to her," their mother said one evening, her voice heavy with sadness. "I can't imagine how hard this must be for you." The words only deepened Rachel's guilt, and she began to crumble under the pressure. One night, she confided in Emily, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this anymore. What if someone finds out?" Emily, terrified by her sister's instability, tried to reassure her. "No one will find out," she said firmly. "We have to stick together." But Rachel's silence felt like a ticking time bomb. Weeks later, during a routine patrol, a local officer noticed a patch of disturbed earth near the maple tree in the woods behind Margaret's house. It struck him as odd, given the otherwise pristine forest floor. Curious, he radioed for assistance, and the area was cordoned off for investigation. A forensic team arrived, and within hours, they unearthed Margaret's body, her remains wrapped in a bloodied bedsheet. The discovery shocked the town, and Margaret's disappearance was now officially a homicide investigation. News spread like wildfire, and the Harper family was thrown into turmoil. Emily and Rachel's parents were devastated, but the sisters' fear overshadowed their grief. They knew it was only a matter of time before the investigation closed in on them. As detectives scoured Margaret's house for evidence, they found 2 knives missing from the kitchen block. Their suspicions grew when they uncovered faint traces of blood on the floorboards, missed during the sisters' frantic cleanup. Back at the police station, they began piecing together a timeline, focusing on who had access to Margaret's house in the days leading up to her disappearance. Emily and Rachel's names were mentioned multiple times by neighbors who had seen their car parked outside. Detectives brought the sisters in for questioning, their tone polite but probing. "When was the last time you saw your grandmother?" they asked. The girls stuck to their story, claiming they hadn't visited Margaret in weeks. But their nervous fidgeting didn't go unnoticed. The pressure became too much for Rachel. One night, she woke Emily, her face pale and tear-streaked. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "I keep hearing her voice, Emily. I can't sleep. I can't eat." Emily tried to calm her, but Rachel's guilt was overwhelming. What if they already know? What if they find the knives? Emily, terrified of losing control, snapped at her. "You can't say anything, Rachel. If you do, we're both done for." But Rachel's resolve was crumbling, and Emily knew it was only a matter of time before her sister broke under questioning. During a second round of questioning, Rachel cracked. She burst into tears, confessing everything to the detectives. Her words came tumbling out: the secret relationship, Margaret's discovery, the murder, and the burial in the woods. Emily, who was being questioned in a separate room, had no idea her sister was spilling their darkest secret. When the detectives confronted Emily with Rachel's confession, she denied everything at first, but her facade quickly crumbled. The sisters were arrested on charges of first-degree murder, their tearful denials echoing through the station. The trial became the scandal of Willow Creek, with reporters flocking to the small town to cover the story. The prosecution painted Emily and Rachel as cold-blooded killers, driven by their illicit relationship to commit a heinous crime. The defense argued that they acted out of fear and desperation, but the jury was unsympathetic. Witnesses testified about Margaret's strong moral values and the close bond she shared with her granddaughters. When the autopsy report revealed the brutality of her death, the courtroom fell silent, the gruesome details leaving no room for doubt. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty. Emily and Rachel were sentenced to life in prison without parole, their futures forever altered by a moment of desperation. As they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, their parents wept openly, mourning not only Margaret but the loss of their daughters. The sisters exchanged one final glance, their bond still unbroken despite everything. In the years that followed, the Harper family struggled to rebuild their lives. David and Laura moved away from Willow Creek, unable to bear the whispers and stares of their neighbors. The story of Emily and Rachel became a cautionary tale, a dark chapter in the town's history. In prison, the sisters remained close, their love a bittersweet reminder of the choices that destroyed their lives. Emily often wondered what might have been if they had chosen a different path. But the shadow of their crime would haunt them forever, a chilling reminder that some secrets are too heavy to bear.